Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review a movie called Wind Chill. So this is available on Tubi, T-U-B-I, as probably as well as a number of other apps that I've probably listed at some point randomly through a number of these reviews. You probably go on and you can check out Vidlesy, Videsy, or more than likely it might have a different name called Vodlesy, Vodesy. But first, check out Vidlesy and see if that works. But anyways, that's where you can kind of watch like anything for free. It seems I could find a number of things there, even like stuff that I would be like, oh wow, I can watch this now. But so, anyways, we have Wind Chill, and this is a very slow-paced film, but it does get rather interesting. I really went into this movie at first because the cast list is very simplistic. We have Emily Blunt's character, who is to just be called Girl, and Ashton Holmes, who is to just be called Guy. And we have like a highway patrolman, we have a snowplow driver, we have a guy behind a gas station who is just to be called Clerk. Everything is very simple. And so that was my main appeal of like, wow, great. Like, because I just went on and did like a whole season where I had to go on and like figure out everybody's name every time that I would talk about certain people, and it would be so confusing for me to just be like, okay, like now I have to remember who these names all are while I'm talking, and it just got really like hard for me to like figure all that out. So I like this because it was simplistic. So what is this movie about? We come to find a girl who is to need a ride for Christmas break for college. So she decides to go on to this ride board to find a possible ride. She does. She finds this guy, and they go on this ride together. And so what eventually ends up happening is they get into a car accident via this highway, and then they get stuck in this location. The only place that they know where to go is this gas station, and this gas station just so happens to be closed. So we come to find our two characters that need to figure out a way to keep warm in this car that has a window that is consistently cracked open. And so we have our characters, while trying to stay warm in this car, are to see these unusual people walking by. And the further and further we go into this film, we start to realize that these people walking by are actually just ghosts. And so that has our two characters then realize that they have to spend this whole entire night not only trying to like fight the elements of like frostbite and uh, and trying to survive without much food, we then also have them fighting elements of the supernatural and needing to figure out how they're going to last the night, just so that way they can go on and finally get to somebody or get to a gas station that could get them out of this problem. So, with that said, I thought that this movie was overall, it was okay. Like, it was very slow paced. The more and more you go through this movie, you start to realize that the guy in this scenario knows a lot about this girl. And the more and more that the girl finds out that the guy knows a lot about this girl, the more that she starts to get really uncomfortable with this guy. And also, she starts to realize that this whole road trip that supposedly both of them were going to go on to both go to Delaware because they have family supposedly there, we find out that the guy was to have planned this whole road trip just so he can get closer to this girl, to hopefully be able to kind of maybe like have a relationship between the two of them, because this guy doesn't need to do this road trip whatsoever. He really is to have lived like 10 minutes from this college and he didn't need to do this road trip whatsoever. So like that goes on and is to be this kind of like, okay, like the girl is to realize that this guy is fairly creepy and stalkerish and that maybe there's something wrong with this guy. But it comes out to be like this really interesting story that like at first like the girl is to realize like how foolish this guy really is, but then it's like, well no, like between the both of them it's like, well I can like the girl starts to see where this guy was to like, well like he was really interested in this girl and like he had good intentions, and so they start to realize that they need one another to survive, and so that just becomes a really interesting story. So with that said, okay movie, did go on and like it. I would definitely recommend it. uh the ghost like characters and how we eventually figure out how this all plays out, because of course we find out at some point in this story that this highway patrolman will be going on and causing a lot of accidents in this highway to get people stuck here, and we end up getting the later and later that this story goes, we get to find out more of this backstory, so it just gets really interesting. So with that said, let's double five this bad boy up. This movie's available on Tubi, or you can possibly find apps like Vidlesy, VIDESY, or more than likely it might be called Vodlesy, VODESY. Weirdly enough, if you can go on and find any number of bootleggish like apps that you can dare in fact watch a ton of movies for free, you would probably go on and do that, right? Like Yes Movies or a number of apps that I've dare in fact recommended at some point that may or may not still exist on the Google Play Store, but that's normally where I would go on and recommend people going on and trying to find something that they can eventually use. So with that said, let's go on into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. So, in the very beginning of this movie, I think I'm going to go on and state like girl and guy instead of like the actual actors' names, but then sometimes I might just like slip and just be like, well, this is Emily and this is Ashton. So, intermittently, it'll be what it is. But, anyways, so we have this girl in the very beginning of this film that is in this classroom, and she's getting a text from somebody asking like, hey, are you done with class? And she goes on and replies yes. So we of course have the person that replies and states like, well, how are you going to get home for Christmas break? And we have the girl that replies like, well, bus, Greyhound. And so we have the reply that is to be like, well, why don't you just go to the ride board and see if anybody is gonna like be willing to give you a ride to where you're going. So we have the girl that goes on leaving her classroom, kind of smacking into people as she's to try to hand in her paper. We have her go off to go to this ride board to find that there's a sign there that says need a ride to Delaware, December 23rd, question mark. So we have, of course, the girl that goes on to rip this paper and is to call this number. So, because she's going to Delaware also. And so we have the girl that is to get all of her luggage together and is to make her way to this guy's car, who he, of course, had fell asleep because this girl had taken way too long to get to his car. And so when she finally knocks on the window, he's like, oh, hey, you're here finally. And so the guy was wanting to like get up early so that way they can go on and kind of miss all this horrible weather. And plus, considering they had to like drive 6 hours to get to this location. So we, of course, have Emily's character that states to Ashton's character, Like, well, hey man, like you really should have just left. Like I was way too late for this. And he's like, no, 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 this is fine. So we have the girl that goes on to try and put her luggage in the trunk of this car, and come to find out the guy is getting evicted from his place, so he just kind of tosses every bit of all of his stuff all in the back of his car. And so the girl's like, well, crap, now I have to kind of shove my stuff in here also. Come to find out, we had the girl that goes on and takes one bag out of this trunk, and that ends up being a big mistake. Because when she goes on and does that, we find out that that whole bag that is left in that parking lot was to be this grocery bag full of a bunch of food for them to go on and use this during this trip. And so now that they don't have that, we go on and have at some point them realize that, and we have them kind of complaining about it. It's like, man, I can't believe that you forgot the groceries. And he goes on and complains about how expensive the food was, especially for Emily Blunt's character's needs. So we have them go on to try and turn the heat on because, of course, it's very cold outside. So we have the girl that realizes that she can't go on and fully hit this button to have the window go all the way up. And so the guy states, is like, well, yeah, like that window doesn't go all the way up. I'm sorry, but that's just how it is. But then later he goes on to state that really he could have like duct taped the window, and like why didn't he do that before, considering it's cold outside. But it's a whole thing of like, well, like they wanted to like showcase that so that way they could like duct tape it later, because so that way they can have it in the story. So while they're driving along, we have the girl that goes on and is calling her friend and is mentioning how like she could be like at Cabo right now, but instead she of course is just driving along this road. And so we all of a sudden have Emily's character that is just talking about Ashton's character as if he's not even there. And so more and more we start to see the guy that is to start to get more and more upset. And she goes on to realize like, oh, like it seems like my driver is just a little bit upset now. So she goes on and she hangs up the phone, and then she looks at the guy. It's like, well, what's wrong? Like, and so the guy is to get upset because if this guy is driving, this girl needs to go on and like talk to him. It's a division of labor. And so, and they have to go on and do everything like 50-50. So we have the girl that's like, oh, so I'm your stewardess, I'm your in-flight entertainment. And so the guy's like, well, yeah, like, come on, like we're having to drive for like 6 hours, and so yeah, so like why don't we talk? So we have the girl that finds out that this guy had been from Wilmington, and she goes on to ask, like, well, hey, where did you go to school at? And he's like, St. Vitus. And she's like, St. Vitus Academy? I'm like, I've never heard of this place before. And we have the guy that mentions, is like, well, like, that's because it's a Catholic boys' school. And so I'm sure, yeah, you've never heard of it. So we end up asking her, like, okay, well, what are you majoring in? And we have him state Eastern religions. And it seems that they were also to talk about the intro to modern philosophy. And so we, of course, have Emily's character that is to try to get her engineering degree or engineering major. And so she just did philosophy, like, just to do it. because she just needed 1 credit for that, and she heard that that thing was to be an easy A. So since they're both in the same philosophy class together, she ends up asking the guy, it's like, well, hey, what did you get for the last answer on the test? And he goes on and states like, oh, well, I got this because like obviously like this would be the right answer. And she's like, oh yeah, I would have had no clue. So uh we go on to have, of course, Emily that's like, okay, like I'm done being your stewardess for today, your in-flight entertainment. And she kind of puts the radio on. So we have them go on and uh, have Emily's character that states like, well, hey, like, why don't you keep your eyes in the road? And we have Ashton's like, yeah, I'm going to keep my eyes peeled. And so she's like, yeah, I don't like that phrase at all. And then he goes on to state, it's like, well, yeah, like keep your eyes peeled. It's like, well, hey, have you ever gone on and heard about that like laser eye surgery? And she's like, well, yeah, I'm gonna go on and I'm gonna get laser eye surgery because I don't like wearing my glasses. And he's like, well, no, like I really like how like you look with glasses on. And she's like, well, how would you know? I only wear my glasses in my dorm room. And the guy is like, yeah. So we have Emily going on and like painting her nails, and she asks Ashton, it's like, well, hey, if you ever see another gas station, because I need to pee. So we have Ashton that goes on and says like, okay, like I'll look around to see when there's going to be a gas station coming up next. So by the time that they finally get to this gas station that is to be called Food Store, very simple. It feels like it's a gas station slash like diner or restaurant. But so anyways, we by the time that we get to this food store, we then have the girl that realizes that he had gotten here too quickly, and she is trying to like kind of wait till her nails dry. And so we have the guy that's like, well, hey, how about we like have you just kind of like piggyback and you just kind of jump on my back, and I'll get you in there, so that way and that's how we'll do it. And so the girl's like, really? Like I don't want to. And so like the guy just tosses her over his back and just they go into this food store. So by the time that they get the food store, the girl's like, okay, you can just kind of drop me now. So we have the girl that asks the clerk where is the bathroom, and so he tells her where it is. So the girl goes in the bathroom. So she is to put on her glasses in this mirror, and she kind of just chuckles and just kind of puts it back down. And so she goes into the bathroom, flushes, and then she ends up going out of the bathroom stall to realize that somehow the bathroom door had gotten locked. So she ends up yelling, I'm locked in, like, hey, somebody help me. Because she knows that there's outside the door, there's a couple men in this diner, and like the girl also should have been heard by a number of these guys. So the girl's like, well, hey, I'm locked in. She goes on to like state, it's like, well, people should hear me. So the girl goes and even yells out into the vent to hope that someone's going to hear her. So it even gets to the point to where the girl tries to like jimmy the door. The door ends up coming off also. And so she's like, ah. So luckily she figures out a way to get the door open, and then so she gets out of the bathroom, And so we have the girl who's upset with a guy, and the clerk. It's like, well, hey, like, shouldn't you guys have heard me? And they're like, no, like, we didn't hear you at all. So she's like, ah, whatever, like, let's get out of here. So they leave the gas station. I think the guy, the clerk, goes on and tells the guy, like, what is his best route to get to where they're going. And we have the girl that states to the guy, it's like, well, wait a minute, like, I thought you knew these roads. And he's like, oh, yeah, I do. I was just kind of double checking with the clerk. It's like, sure you are, sure you are. So we have the girl that goes on and is to, like, pay for half of the gas. And we have the guy that's like, no, I can't accept this. And she goes on to be like, well, like this is 50-50, like, division of labor. And he's like, no, 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 like, you just keep the money. I don't take money from friends. So they go onto this road, and we have our characters going on and taking a shortcut. And so the girl doesn't like that the guy is taking the shortcut, and she's like, no, I want you to be on the highway. And he's like, no, like, this is a shortcut, this is a better route. And come to find out, this will be a thing that they will regret for the rest of their life. So we all of a sudden notice that the radio isn't working via this area. And we have the girl that states, it's like, well, yeah, like, we're in a valley now. Like, FM radios won't work because it's a whole, like, frequency thing. Like, go on and instead and adjust to the AM radio, and you'll probably get something there. So the guy's like, oh man, like, where were you when I had a problem with figuring out something in class? So they start to go on and they start to talk about Christmas. They start to talk about, like, what they are to go on and kind of do for the holidays. And so come to find out, Ashton's character is to not believe in Santa Claus. He has a thing called Sinterklaas. And it's like, well, what's that about? And so he goes on to explain that this guy is to be kind of like set up, and he has this kind of it's somewhat Santa similar, but like he has a guardian, and it's very odd. No offense to anybody that believes in Sinterklaas, but I was just like, okay, I still don't quite understand what any of that means. So if anybody knows about Sinterklaas and knows the history of it, and you celebrate it, let me know what exactly all that meant. I knew nothing about Sinterklaas. At some point, I went on and saw, like, the guy is to be like, he like is on a horse. I saw an image of it somewhere. He's on a horse somewhere, and like he has this kind of like almost like Pope like getup. It is what it is. I'm very ignorant about Sinterklaas. My bad. So we come to find out we have the girl who is to state that she has two parent Christmases. She has to go on and kind of in between try to figure out a way when she goes to her father's Christmas and her mother's Christmas, because I guess her mother and father are separated. So we have them continuing to drive along, and so we have the girl that is to ask the guy, it's like, well, hey, like, do you go on and do you go to these two places? Like, which one would you want to go on and be at? Like, would you want to go on to Stone Harbor? And he's like, well, yeah, I'd want to go on to Stone Harbor. And so she's like, oh, like, so, like you do realize that the Stone Harbor is like the Jersey Shore. And like when the guy answers that, or isn't she? No, wait. What happens here is she names two locations, and she says that the opposite location is to be the Jersey Shore, when actually it's Stone Harbor is actually the Jersey Shore. My bad. So we all of a sudden have finally the girl's character realize this guy has no clue about Delaware. And so they all of a sudden are getting into this fight about like, well, hey, why did you do all this? Like, and she comes to find out that this guy doesn't live far from the college. And so she just gets really upset. By this time, there all of a sudden is this car that is to be on this one road. And so we, of course, have the girl that is to state, it's like, well, hey, like, how about you get off onto the shoulder and let this car just get by? And the guy is like, well, what shoulder? There is no shoulder. It's just snow in one road. So we come to find out that Emily and Ashton's car is to have to go like flying off onto the side of this road, and they get into this accident. So we go on to have the girl that is trying to call 911, but there's no signal. And so of course there isn't, because why would there be? Like, it would have to like perfectly in line with, like, you can't ever use cell phones in a movie, because in a horror film you can never use a cell phone because they have to write some way into it. So we have the girl that asks the guy, it's like, well, hey, like, where's your cell phone? And he's like, well, I don't have one. And she's like, seriously, you don't have a cell phone? And he's like, no, I don't. We also had Emily's character that goes on and takes a picture of the guy that she was with, to send to her friend. So that way she could be safe. Like, she should have gone on and like took a picture of the license plate also. So we ask if either one of them are okay. It seems that the girl is to state that she's fine, but it seems the guy had gone on to hit his head. And so we have them go and write the other car off as just some hit and run. And we have the guy that realizes, wait, like, if he was to go on and cause this accident with us, like, where is the tire tracks? Like, where is the uh, residual, or where is the, like, the sign that states that this guy was to have, like, been here? And they're like, I don't know. So we have the guy that is trying to push his car while the girl is in the car, trying to put more gas into the car. So he's pushing even harder, and the car won't move. And so, like, well, I guess we're stuck. We're effed. So we go on to, of course, have the girl who is arguing with the guy. It's like, well, hey, like, why did you go on and even have us go through, like, this shortcut? And he states, like, he read somewhere that there's amazing views in this one location. And she is to state, it's like, well, like, amazing views? Like, really? In, like, all of this crap that's just, like, no. Like, so we have the girl that makes a clear consensus that this guy had stranded them here on purpose. And so we have, of course, Emily's character that is to try to call her friend to hope that her friend will call the cops. So we have the guy that cannot go back into the car because Emily had locked herself into the car. And so he's like, well, hey, like, it's really cold out here. And she's like, I don't care. You stay out there because you had to stay here on purpose. Like, you've made this to have me, like, think that you are a dangerous guy. So we have the guy that's like, well, you know what? I'm going to walk to the gas station, and I hope that I hope at one point you're wanting to just kind of join me so we can both get to the gas station together. And she's like, well, I bet you do. And so he's like, well, like, if you're just going to stay in the car, how about you go on, because I have duct tape. And he's like, well, and she goes on to like, well, yeah, I bet you do. You creepy motherfucker. So he's like, no, 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 no. Like, I'm just telling you, like, you can go on and take duct tape and some other items, and you could kind of patch this window so you can stay warm. I'm just telling you that. So the guy starts to walk off to the gas station. So the girl, while he's gone, is to go outside to patch the window and is to get some duct tape and some newspaper. So we all of a sudden, while the girl is to kind of be in the car, just kind of waiting, she all of a sudden sees this kind of unusual man kind of just walking by. And so she starts to follow him. All of a sudden, realize when she starts to follow this guy, he disappears. So we go on to have the guy come back from the gas station, scare the crap out of her. And so she was like, well, hey, like, what happened with the gas station? And we have the guy that states, as well, like, the gas station was closed. We also had the guy who was to start to have something wrong with him also, which he kind of hides from the girl. But then we'll find out later that there is something wrong with the guy. So we have the girl that states is like, well, no, like, gas stations should be open like 24/7. Like, why isn't this gas station still open? And we have the guy that justifies is like, well, no, like, it's a mom and pop's place, like, they have their own hours. So we have the guy that states like, well, hey, I'm getting in the car, and like, I don't care if you want me not in the car or not. Like, I'm gonna get in the car because I want to stay warm. So we have them go on to go into the car, and so we find out that supposedly the guy's watch is broken. It's like, well, yeah, I guess that's another thing that just doesn't work here. So we go on to have all of a sudden the guy talking about if ever, like, this girl was in a fight with anybody, that if she's ever in a bar, she should go on and take a bottle and smash the bottle on the bridge of the guy's nose, and so that way she could kind of have enough time to, like, get away from the guy. And so the girl's like, why are you telling me this, you creep? So we have the moment again where we have the guy state that he's only 10 minutes from school, that he wanted to get to know this girl within this 6-hour road trip. And so the girl states is like, well, hey, like, but how did you know I was going to need a ride? Like, how did you know? Because normally I would go on and I would fly to my family's place. How did you know this one time that I was going to go Greyhound? And we come to find out that back when Emily was in this class, we had the guy who was right behind her, and he was kind of poking through her texts and reading them. So he knew that she was going to go on and need this ride. So, of course, he goes on and is to, before Emily leaves this classroom, he rushes to get this sign on this thing to try and get this girl to go with him on this road trip. So we then have them realize, as the guy is to go into the back of this trunk, he realizes that the groceries were left behind. So he, of course, was very upset because he had to spend like $60 on those groceries, because the groceries were all this gourmet crap that the girl really likes. And so he starts rattling off all this food, and she's like, oh my god, I really like this food. And he's like, yeah, and it's like, I had to spend $60 for this. And she's like, I'll write you a check. Shut up. So we have the guy that realizes that he finds like a candy bar in the back of his car just randomly somewhere. So they share this candy bar together. And so we have again the guy that says like, I can't believe you left the... And she's like, shut up. So we go and have the guy that's like, well, yeah, like really, I think for girls like you, there should always be like this warning label where like girls in belly shirts are flakier than they would appear. So we go and have the girl. It's like, well, what about you, stalker? And so it's like, yeah, okay. So we all of a sudden have the two of them start to realize that like the car is like stopping, like completely working, that they can't have the heater on anymore. And so they realize, because the car is leaking gas, because I guess the part of the car had like cracked, uh, the gas, uh, the fuel line. I don't know what exactly that was called, but so we had the car that was leaking gas, and because of the accident. And so like, man, I guess we're really effed now. So we have them go back into the car, and so the guy is like, well, like we could, like, of course, have body heat to keep us warm. And the girl's like, dream on. It's like, no, like I'm not touching you, I'm not hugging on you, so we can just stay warm. Like we're not dead yet. So the girl again has to go outside because she needs to pee again. So the guy's like, oh, okay, all right, well, like, so like you can just go out there and just pee away. And she's like, don't look at me. I'm like, I'm not. Like, so we have the girl that is to go pee outside, and then all of a sudden she starts to notice a bunch of guys just walking by again. And so we come to find out that all these guys are to be these priests. It's like, okay, this is very unusual. So we have the girl that runs off to the guy. It's like, well, hey, I found like a number of other guys. Like they're all just walking by. And he's like, what? So he goes on to follow these guys, and she was like, well, yeah, like they should have saw me, they should have stopped, but they didn't. So the guy is to follow this location to eventually find this burnt down home. And so he makes his way into the home to eventually start to notice that there is to be some beds there. And so he ends up noticing that there are dead corpses in these beds. The people that died in their bed had, like, this house had burned down with these guys inside of it. And we then find that the guy realizes that there's these priests that were to all have died in this house. And so we even start to see one of the bodies just kind of move. And it's like, oh my god, this is pretty creepy. So we have the girl who is to again run into that one guy that she had seen before that was kind of just walking by. So she finally is to meet up with this guy, and we have the guy that states, please, officer, don't put me in this river. And we have the girl that's like, what are you talking about? And so she tries to touch him, and it seems that her hand ends up getting slightly frostbitten. And so we all of a sudden have the guy turn around, and this guy looks freaking awful. This guy, it looks like he has like almost like yellow skin, and he all of a sudden is to have this snake just come out of his mouth. And I'm like, delicious. And so we then all of a sudden have Emily, who's kind of like backing away from this guy, to then smack into these two other guys. One of them is kind of wearing this leather jacket, and both of them seem to look like corpses. So they're both dead. We found out that all three of these people have to be ghosts. So the girl gets so afraid she can't even talk when the guy meets back up with her. And so she's just like, and he's like, what are you talking about? And so we have him like bringing her back in the car, trying to keep her warm, and just like the girl is just like, so we go on to have them try to keep the air out, and so they really try to go on and duct tape this window really good. So we then go on to 11:17 p.m., where they have to spend the whole night in this car trying to keep warm. So we have the two of them, and the girl is stated, it's like, well, I can't really sleep. Like, I'm afraid if I fall asleep that I won't wake up again because like we might get too cold and we just might die in our sleep. So the guy's like, well, yeah, I get it, I understand. So we all of a sudden have the highway patrolman, and the highway patrolman is like, well, hey, like you guys are both out here. What are you out here for? So I'm probably doing an accent that the guy probably doesn't have, but I figured I would just throw that out there anyways. So we all of a sudden have the officer that's like, well, okay, like since the two of you are kind of out here, like you know what, if we can come to like some kind of arrangement and like I can go on and get a good payday out of this, maybe I'll help you guys out. So the girl is talking to the guy. It's like, well, yeah, this must be some kind of weird shakedown. And so the girl is asking the guy, it's like, well, how much money do you have on you? And he's like, just give him all the money we have. So we have the girl that goes to the highway patrolman, and so we have the girl that's like, well, hey, here's all the money that we have. And so the guy is like, well, yeah, like maybe you should just kind of come with me. And the girl's like, well, hey, like where's your Christmas spirit? Like, come on. So we have the officer that gets into, or we have the officer that is to tell the girl's character, it's like, well, hey, get into my car, and because you're not going anywhere. So we all of a sudden have the guy that's to realize that this cop is being very unreasonable, and so it seems that this guy is like grabbing on this girl, and so the guy goes in and takes this crowbar, I believe, and is to kind of swipe at this cop because he's being very awful to this girl. So when the guy hits the guy with the crowbar, he realizes that his hands are now stuck to this crowbar, to the point where like he can't get his hands off this crowbar. So they realize that this highway patrolman is a ghost, that when the guy hits him, nothing happens. So the patrolman is to be this ghost, as well as his car also disappears. So we have them going back into the car, and so now we quickly have the girl that is to have to kind of rip off this guy's hands from this crowbar, and so now she's having to force this guy's hands onto this girl's chest, so that way he can get circulation back into his hands because his hands are now frostbitten. So when the girl kind of lifts up her shirt to have the guy put his hands on her stomach, he's just like, no, I'm not in the mood of this, like, no. And so she's like, no, it's not like that. I'm trying to keep you I'm trying to keep your hands from not losing your hands, so come on, just put your hands on my stomach. So we go on to have the two of them realize that that officer was a ghost, and they're like, well, hey, like how can we go on and defeat this? Like, how can we go on and like figure this out? And the guy's like, I don't know, like ghosts weren't in like in modern philosophy. They didn't cover that in philosophy. So we end up having them both just hugging to keep warm at this point. So we have the girl that goes on and just wants a conversation from this guy. It's like, well, hey, just tell me what was in the grocery bag. Just tell me all the stuff that was in the grocery bag. So he's, again, rattling off all this gourmet stuff, and she's like, I love this. I love this food. He's like, yeah, I know. So we go on to all of a sudden have Emily, who is to look at this newspaper that just so happens to be covering the event that they are to be somehow inside of. Technically, the whole story, they're inside the story. Technically, they're another extra part of it. But so we have Emily that is reading off this newspaper that is tied to these priests that were the first to arrive at this scene of this crash of Route 606. We have the patrolman that was also involved in the accident. And so then we pass on to 2:32 a.m. So we have a retaping again going on of this window. And so we all of a sudden find that briefly that the radio turns on for some goofy reason to kind of scare the characters here. So Emily is awake, but I think the guy is still asleep. So we all of a sudden have Emily, who is kind of having her back to this door, and we all of a sudden have the highway patrolman who grabs Emily from out of this car, breaking the window, and is to pull her out of the car. And then all of a sudden we see this flashback from the 50s of the highway patrolman going on to have pulled this girl, this blonde girl, out the same way from this car in the 50s. So this guy's been doing this for a very long time. So he pulls her out from this car, and we have the priests or we have the girl who ends up kind of getting kind of dragged out to the woods and dropped somewhere. So because the patrolman goes on to like grab the girl from the window, he ends up putting her in his car, and then he ends up taking her out to the woods and then dropping her somewhere. So we had the priests that were kind of watching on as this was to go on and happen. So we have the girl that somehow gets back into the car because the highway patrolman had kind of gotten away. So the girl had gotten back in the car with the guy, and so all of a sudden we have the car that starts to shake because of the ghosts. So all of a sudden they're realizing that the car is shaking, and they're realizing that, like, oh my god, I don't think we're gonna make it out of here alive. So now at 4:58 a.m., we have the girl that is finally talking to the guy about her prior boyfriend, and it's like, well, hey, like, I thought you were mentioning that you were supposed to be in Cabo instead of being here with me. And so the girl is like, well, yeah, like, my boyfriend, like, he was a little bit too into me, and like, I just didn't want that. So we have the girl that all of a sudden is to notice a thing of water that of course is already like technically empty and just has now urine in it because the guy just took this bottle and was to pee in it. So she all of a sudden notices within this bottle that the guy is all of a sudden peeing blood. And so she's like, oh my god, like, are you okay? And the guy's like, no, I'm not. And so she's like, oh my god. So he's like, well, yeah, like, I noticed that I was starting to, like, cough up blood when I was trying to make it to the gas station. And so, like, that was the reason why he kind of hesitated going to the gas station. So, and he knew that there was some problem with him. So we have the girl that is to state, it's like, well, hey, like, maybe I should go on and maybe I should try to run for the gas station. And the guy is like, well, like, think about it. If you go out there, you're just going to find the highway patrolman and, like, he's going to get to you. And she's like, well, yeah, but, like, so we all of a sudden have this girl that starts to realize that she is to see this telephone pole. And so if they oddly enough weren't to get a phone signal via their cell phones, she realizes that there is to be this junction box on this telephone pole. And if she just goes on to climb this telephone pole, she can go on and like hopefully have this kind of landline old-fashioned phone and kind of disconnect it and reconnect it into this junction box and be able to call out somewhere. And so the guy's like, okay, that sounds like a plan. So we have her go and have to climb this pole, this junction, to get to this junction box, this telephone pole. So it luckily had all these kind of things where she can kind of put her feet. I think the scissors that she had with her ends up dropping after she goes on and kind of hits this thing to kind of get it unlocked. So we go on to have the girl who is to call out, and the phone number is kind of broken up. Like she could barely get a real connection here, but I believe she ends up going on to call out somewhere. So when she goes back to the car, we go on to then realize that the guy goes on to also have told the girl about that he would like to have like repeated his life for the last 24 hours. That maybe they could have gone on and made different decisions during this one time, because in philosophy they have it to where or in one of their classes they have it to where like you can have like a whole thing where it's like, what if you would have had like a repeated day where you could have made different decisions. So and also that the guy could have probably, instead of like kind of doing this in a very creepy way, he could have met with this girl and said hi. So the guy turns on the radio, and so uh, maybe I'm getting way ahead of myself at some point, because like by the time that the girl is to go out there and go to the junction box and do all this, by the time that she comes back, after they two have had this conversation about the repeated day and everything like that, so we have the girl that when she goes back to the car after this whole junction box thing, the girl states that she had gotten through to somebody. But by that time, the guy is already dead. The guy is now to have kind of been in so poor health that he died by the time the girl calls out. So at 5:43 a.m., the girl is to take the guy's body and is to just drag it outside. So we have this snowplow driver that is to find this girl and pick her up. So we have the snowplow driver that is to kind of make a call on his radio stating that he had picked up this girl. And so the guy starts talking about this whole highway and the history of it. Then in the 50s, there were these accidents because of this bad cop that would run kids off the road. But it seems that the cop had at some point also died on this highway too. So we would also have the guy state it's at some point that some New York family had all gotten frozen onto the road, and that every time there would just be some new fresh family or some new fresh victims that would be on this highway every year during the holidays. So it's like, oh, okay, so there's always like a trigger here. We just have the people who go onto this highway the wrong time of year. So we also had the priest that had frozen to death in this mess. So we go on to have the snowplow driver that is to realize that there's somebody on the road And so we end up having both cars flip. Both the snowplow driver, he ends up flipping his car, and we also have the cop who is to kind of flip his car too. So we have the snowplow driver that is to go back to see if the other car is okay, and the girl states it's like, no, he's already dead. That's the bad cop. That's the ghost. Don't go after him. So we have the snowplow driver who goes to that other car anyways, and so we find the priests that have made their way there, and they are to take the radio from off of this car and rip it out. So we find that the officer is to burn in his car via this accident, and so we would have at one point that the guy had stated at some point that uh, the thing that he went on and did was to have really gone on and try to help out this girl would have just been some like a sweet funny story that they would have someday when they were to be made a couple, and maybe if they had kids they would always tell them this story of how they met. And so we went on and had this guy who was to go on uh, and the guy that the girl's with is now to have been this ghost. So the girl gets to the gas station, and now we have these firefighter men that are kind of wrapping her hand and are kind of giving her this like oxygen to breathe. And so we have the end of this, that this girl goes on uh, to look at her phone. So like that's she looks at the phone and is to see the guy's picture, and so that's how the movie just ends, with her realizing that she is the only one left alive, and she is just very just sad. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Let me know in the comments below how you felt about Wind Chill. I know that this is a very slow-paced movie, and I know there were some points where I kind of had to like, what the heck am I even saying here? For part of this, I do apologize if there were some points where it's like, what is he talking about? Huh? What? Who? Huh? I don't know. But yeah, there's also certain things that I would just state that you would have to really just go into the movie to really understand every bit of what I was talking about. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.